Ukraine struggles to hold eastern front as Russians advance on cities. For Ukrainian gun commander Oleksandr Kozichenko, the long-awaited U.S. ammunition can't come fast enough as he and his comrades struggle to hold off relentless Russian attacks. His unit's U.S.-supplied M777 howitzer, which once hurled 100 shells a day at the encroaching enemy, is now often reduced to fewer than 10. It's a luxury if we can fire 30 shells. America says it's rushing ammunition and weapons to Ukraine following the delayed approval of a $61 billion aid package by Congress last month. As of early May, though, 2 artillery units visited by Reuters on the eastern front line said they were still waiting for a boost in deliveries and operating at a fraction of the rate they need to hold back the Russians. Gunners with Kozichenko's 148th Separate Artillery Brigade and the 43rd Artillery Brigade, both in the Donetsk region, said they were desperate for more 155mm rounds for their western cannons, which had given them an edge over Russia earlier in the war. Resurgent Russian forces, which significantly outnumber and outgun the Ukrainian defenders, have been mounting multiple attacks across the eastern Donbas region in recent months and along the country's northeastern border last week. The drive has marked an inflection point in the conflict spawned by Russia's full-scale invasion more than 2 years ago. Russia has gained more territory in 2024 than it lost control of during Ukraine's much-hyped counteroffensive in the summer of 2023, according to Pasi Poroinen, an analyst with Blackbird Group, a Finnish-based volunteer group that analyses satellite imagery and social media content from the war. Moscow's forces have claimed 654 square kilometers since the beginning of this year, outstripping the 414 square kilometers lost to Ukraine between June 1 and October 1 last year, Poroinen said. Russia has gained 222 square kilometers of territory since only May 2, he added. Russia's defense ministry didn't respond to a request for comment for this article, while Ukraine's military didn't immediately respond. Colonel Pavlo Palisa, whose 93rd Mechanized Brigade is fighting near the key strategic city of Chasiv Yar, said he believed Russia was preparing a major push to break Ukrainian lines in the east. This echoed the commander of Ukraine's ground forces, who said last week he expected the war to enter a critical phase over the next 2 months as Moscow tries to exploit persistent delays in weapons supplies to Kiev. Without a doubt, this will be a difficult period for the armed forces, said Palisa, adding that he believes the Kremlin wants to capture the entire Donbas industrial region by the end of this year. Russian forces are gradually making inroads that could come to threaten several big cities in the east, including Kostiantynivka, Drushkivka, Kramatorsk and Sloviansk, which serve as key military hubs for Kiev's war effort. Some gains are striking fear in the heart of the hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians living in those Donetsk region cities as the enemy grinds ever closer. We live only for today, said 31-year-old schoolteacher Nina Shishimariva, standing with her young daughter outside a church in Kostiantynivka as artillery thundered in the distance. We don't know what will happen tomorrow. Russian cannons are now easily within range of Kostiantynivka. The closest Russian position at the start of 2024 was about 20 kilometers away, according to open-source maps that show shifting positions along the front line. Now, it is 14 kilometers. Shishimariva and the fighters on the front line were among more than a dozen soldiers, commanders, residents and evacuation volunteers interviewed by Reuters in eastern Ukraine over the last 2 weeks. They painted a picture of deep uncertainty. Much of the Donetsk region, which along with Luhansk makes up the greater Donbas area, is under daily bombardment, typically targeted at least a dozen times a day by Russian artillery or air strikes, according to regional governor Vadim Filishkin. Ruins of homes, apartment blocks and administrative buildings are common sights in towns and cities. Oleksandr Stasenko, a volunteer rescuer, said his team was receiving more evacuation requests, particularly from Kostiantynivka and Kharkiv, another town further south, among other settlements. Russian forces have encroached toward Kharkiv, too, advancing 2 to 3 kilometers along the road running east from the town so far this year. Wherever the front line is approaching, people in those places are trying to leave as soon as possible, said Stasenko, adding that his group, East SOS, evacuates around 24 a week, many of them elderly or infirm. Ukraine has roughly 1,000 kilometers of front lines to defend in the east, north and south. Some of the fiercest fighting in 2024 has centered on Chasiv Yar, which commands important high ground 12 kilometers away from Kostiantynivka. It lies west of the devastated city of Bakhmut that Moscow seized last year after months of costly combat. Russian advances near Chasiv Yar, and further south around the village of Okeratine, could drive wedges into territory relied upon by Ukraine's war planners for logistics, analysts said, because they would expose key roads to Russian fire. A major highway leading west out of Kostiantynivka is already under threat. Cutting it off entirely would mean transit hubs further north, including Kramatorsk and Sloviansk, both numbering well over 100,000 people before the war, would lose a crucial supply line. Russia's fresh assault on the northeastern Kharkiv region, which began on Friday, also risks diverting stretched Ukrainian forces from the eastern front, further compromising their ability to hold the line, according to said Emil Castahelmi, another analyst at Blackbird Group. At the moment, it seems the goal of the Kharkiv operation is to cause confusion and tie remaining Ukrainian reserves to areas of lesser importance, he said. Jack Waddling, a senior research fellow at the London-based Rusi think tank, said Russian forces would likely mount further attacks on northern and southern points of the front line in order to stretch Kiev's defenses. Once Ukraine commits its reserves in these directions, the main effort will see the expansion of the Russian push in Donbass, he wrote in a May 14 commentary. A new law strengthening Kiev's mobilization effort, which has been hobbled by public skepticism, takes effect on May 18. Experts and commanders say it could take several months before fresh recruits reach the front and reinforce exhausted troops there. Even if Ukrainian forces can hold out until all the American ammunition and weapons get through to the front, the challenge ahead remains daunting, according to many of those fighting. I would say that it is unlikely that time is on our side, since a long war requires more resources, said Palisa, the colonel with the 93rd Mechanized Brigade, speaking hours after Russia launched its ground incursion in Kharkiv. He added that it would be critical to impose as heavy a cost on Russia as quickly as possible. The enemy's resources, whether in terms of manpower or the material, cannot be compared with ours. It's extraordinarily large. That is why a long war, I think, is not in our favor.